Commander Lee Jiwoo woke up feeling like her head was stuffed with cotton. Everything felt wrong. The surface beneath her wasn't the metal floor of her ship, but something smooth and warm that seemed to glow. She blinked hard, trying to clear her vision, and slowly pushed herself up on her elbows. The room around her made no sense. The walls looked like they were made of giant crystals, but they weren't still like normal crystals should be. Instead, they pulsed with a soft blue light that moved in waves like a slow heartbeat. The air itself felt different too, buzzing with some kind of energy that made her skin tingle. It reminded her of standing too close to a power generator, but gentler somehow. Jiwoo's military training kicked in automatically. She took slow, deep breaths and tried to remember what had happened. She had been piloting her reconnaissance ship through the outer rim of explored space, checking for new planets that might support human colonies. The mission was supposed to be routine, boring even. She remembered seeing something strange on her sensors near the Kepler 442 system, a gravitational reading that didn't match any known stellar objects. Then everything had gone sideways. Her ship's instruments had started going crazy, alarms blaring as something massive pulled her vessel off course. The last thing she could recall was her ship being swallowed by what looked like a tear in space itself, surrounded by swirling colors that hurt to look at directly. Now she was here, wherever here was. A soft sound made her look up. Something was moving in the darker corners of the crystal chamber. Jiwoo tensed, her hand instinctively reaching for the weapon that should have been on her belt. Of course it wasn't there. The figure that stepped into the light was unlike anything she had ever seen, even in the wildest science fiction movies. It stood nearly 7 feet tall, towering over her even though she was considered tall by human standards. Its skin seemed to be alive, shifting between silver and deep purple like oil on water. What really caught her attention, though, were the forearms that moved with an almost dance-like grace as it approached. The being's head was elongated, not quite human in shape, and where humans had 2 eyes, this creature had 3. They glowed with their own internal light, studying Jiwoo with what seemed like genuine curiosity rather than hostility. When it spoke, Jiwoo nearly jumped out of her skin, not because the voice was frightening, but because it was speaking perfect Korean, her native language. The words came out like the sound of wind chimes in a gentle breeze, musical and strangely beautiful. "Welcome, human warrior," the being said, and Jiwoo could hear something like satisfaction in its tone. "I am Queen Vexandra of the Stellar Dominion. According to our binding intergalactic agreement, you now belong to me." The words hit Jiwoo like a physical blow. Belong to her? What kind of agreement? She had never heard of any treaties with alien species, and she was pretty sure she would have remembered signing something that gave away her freedom. Her military training took over again, keeping her voice steady despite the racing of her heart. She sat up slowly, making sure not to make any sudden movements that might be seen as threatening. Years of dealing with difficult situations had taught her that staying calm was often the difference between living and dying. "I'm sorry, but I think there's been some mistake," she said, proud that her voice came out level and controlled. Inside, her mind was racing, trying to process everything that was happening. An alien queen who spoke Korean, claiming she owned Jiwoo because of some agreement. It sounded like something out of a bad movie, but the crystal walls pulsing around her and the impossible being standing before her were very real. Whatever was happening, it was definitely not normal, and Jiwoo had a sinking feeling that her life had just become much more complicated than she had ever imagined. Queen Vexandra gestured for Jiwoo to follow her, and despite every instinct telling her to be cautious, Jiwoo found herself walking alongside the towering alien. What choice did she have? She was apparently on some kind of spaceship, light years from Earth with no way home. The corridors they walked through were nothing like the sterile metal hallways of human spacecraft. These walls seemed alive, made of some kind of metal that rippled and shifted as they passed. Jiwoo couldn't help but reach out and touch one of the walls, jerking her hand back in surprise when the surface felt warm and seemed to pulse under her fingertips like a heartbeat. "The ship responds to life," Queen Vexandra explained, noticing Jiwoo's reaction. "It knows we are here and adjusts to make us comfortable. Your human ships are so cold and dead in comparison." Jiwoo wanted to argue, to defend human engineering. But she had to admit, the alien ship felt more welcoming than any spacecraft she had ever been on. The walls glowed just bright enough to see clearly, and the temperature was perfect. Even the air smelled pleasant, like a garden after rain. They walked for what felt like miles through twisting corridors that seemed to reshape themselves as they moved. Just when Jiwoo was starting to wonder if they were walking in circles, they emerged into a space so vast that it took her breath away. The archive was enormous, with a ceiling that disappeared into darkness high above them. But what really amazed Jiwoo were the thousands of glowing documents floating in the air around them. They moved in slow, organized patterns like schools of fish, each one pulsing with its own light. Some were small, no bigger than a piece of paper, while others were huge scrolls that unrolled and rolled back up as they drifted past. "This is where we keep all the agreements and treaties made with the countless species of our domain," Queen Vexandra said, her voice filled with something that might have been pride. "Some are trade agreements, others are peace treaties. A few are more personal arrangements." She raised one of her forearms, and Jiwoo watched in fascination as one of the floating documents broke away from its group and drifted toward them. As it came closer, Jiwoo could see that it was covered in symbols that looked nothing like any human writing she had ever seen. The characters seemed to move and shift on their own, like living things. "Behold," the Queen said dramatically, "the Treaty of First Contact signed by your species 73 Earth years ago." Jiwoo stared at the document as it hovered in front of her face. The alien writing was completely unreadable, but as she watched, something incredible happened. The strange symbols began to change, reshaping themselves into letters she could understand. Within moments, the entire document was written in perfect Korean. What she read there made her blood turn to ash. The treaty was simple and terrifying. In exchange for protection from something called the Great Devourer and other unspecified galactic threats, Earth agreed to provide their finest warrior champion every 50 years. This champion would serve the Stellar Dominion in whatever capacity was needed for as long as they lived. Jiwoo read the terms 3 times, hoping she was misunderstanding something. But the language was clear and brutal. Earth had essentially agreed to give away their best people as slaves every 50 years. "This is impossible," she whispered, her voice barely audible in the vast archive. Earth made first contact only 15 years ago. Everyone knows that. It was all over the news, celebrated as the greatest moment in human history. Queen Vexandra's 3 eyes narrowed, and for the first time since Jiwoo had met her, the alien looked almost sad. "Your governments lied to you," she said simply. "The first contact happened much earlier, in secret. Your leaders were desperate, facing a threat they couldn't understand or fight. The agreement was negotiated hastily, under circumstances that left them with very few choices." Jiwoo felt like the ground was falling away beneath her feet. Everything she thought she knew about human history, about first contact, about her own world's place in the galaxy, was apparently a lie. "But why keep it secret?" she asked. "Why not tell people the truth?" "Because the truth was terrifying," Queen Vexandra replied. "Your species wasn't ready to know that you were not alone in the universe, and that some of the things out there wanted to destroy you completely." Jiwoo woke up in what she had started thinking of as her prison cell, though it was more comfortable than most 5-star hotels back on Earth. The crystalline walls were glowing a soft golden color this morning, and she wondered if that meant something, or if the ship just had moods, like a living thing. A gentle chime filled the room, and a section of the wall dissolved to reveal one of Queen Vexandra's servants. This one looked like a cross between a butterfly and a person, with delicate wings that shimmered in the light. "The Queen requests your presence in the grand arena," the servant said in a voice like tinkling bells. "The trials begin in 1 hour." Jiwoo's stomach dropped. She had hoped maybe the whole proving your worth thing had been some kind of misunderstanding. Apparently not. The journey to the arena took her through parts of the ship she hadn't seen before. Everything was bigger than it had any right to be, with ceilings that disappeared into darkness and corridors wide enough to drive a truck through. But what really caught her attention were the other beings they passed. She saw creatures that looked like walking trees, others that seemed to be made of liquid metal, and some that defied description entirely. When they finally reached the arena, Jiwoo's breath caught in her throat. The space was enormous, stretching out so far that she couldn't see the other side. It was like someone had taken a football stadium and multiplied it by 1,000. The floor was made of the same living metal as the ship's corridors, but here it was perfectly smooth and reflective. Above them, floating platforms held what must have been thousands of spectators. Jiwoo had thought she was getting used to seeing alien life forms, but the variety here was overwhelming. Some of the creatures were so strange that her brain couldn't quite process what she was looking at. Others were almost beautiful in their weirdness. Queen Vexandra sat on a throne that hovered high above the arena floor. Her voice somehow carried clearly despite the distance, probably thanks to some kind of alien technology. "Citizens of the Stellar Dominion," she announced, her words echoing through the vast space. "Today we witness another trial of worth. The human champion will attempt what champions from 47 worlds have failed to achieve." Jiwoo felt her heart racing. No pressure at all. Every tribute must prove their worth through 3 trials. The Queen continued. "These challenges have been attempted by the greatest warriors, the most brilliant minds and the strongest spirits our galaxy has to offer. None have succeeded in all 3. The arena floor began to change around Jiwoo. The smooth metal surface rippled and reformed itself, creating obstacles, walls, and platforms. Then, as if someone had flipped a switch, enemy fighters began appearing out of thin air. They looked real enough, but Jiwoo could tell they were some kind of advanced holograms. "The first trial," Queen Vexandra's voice boomed, "combat against adaptive opponents. They will learn from every move you make and become stronger with each passing moment. Begin!" The holographic fighters charged at Jiwoo immediately. She dodged. The first attack, her military training kicking in automatically. But as she moved to counterattack, something made her pause. These weren't real enemies. This was a test, and she had a feeling that the obvious solution wasn't the right one. Instead of fighting, Jiwoo stepped back and really looked at what was happening. The holograms were reacting to her aggressive movements, becoming more violent and coordinated. But when she stopped moving aggressively, they seemed confused. Taking a deep breath, Jiwoo did something that probably looked crazy to everyone watching. She sat down cross-legged in the middle of the arena and closed her eyes. The meditation. Techniques she had learned during her military service had always helped her think clearly under pressure. The holograms attacked her position, but their weapons passed right through her without doing any damage. They were programmed to respond to aggression and fear, but her calm meditation was something they couldn't process. After a few minutes, the entire program started glitching. The holographic fighters began moving erratically, their forms flickering and distorting. Finally, with a sound like breaking glass, the whole combat simulation shut down completely. The arena fell silent. Jiwoo opened her eyes to find thousands of alien spectators staring at her, in what she hoped was amazement rather than disappointment. "Fascinating." Queen Vexandra's voice carried a note of genuine surprise. "The human has passed the first trial, through nonviolence. This has never happened before." The arena floor shifted again, this time creating a massive 3-dimensional puzzle that hung in the air in front of Jiwoo. It was made of numbers and symbols that moved and changed constantly, creating patterns that hurt to look at directly. "The second trial," the Queen announced. "The infinite equation. It has broken the minds of our greatest mathematicians and driven computer systems to complete shutdown. You must find the solution that exists but cannot be calculated." Jiwoo stared at the floating puzzle, feeling overwhelmed. The numbers were changing too fast for her to follow, and the patterns seemed to twist in ways that made no mathematical sense. This wasn't something you could solve with logic or computation, but maybe that was the point. Instead of trying to solve the equation directly, Jiwoo started looking at the spaces between the numbers, the moments when the patterns shifted from one configuration to another. There, in those tiny gaps, she began to see something that looked almost like music, she whispered. The Queen's private chambers were nothing like Jiwoo had expected. Instead of the grand, intimidating throne room she had imagined, the space felt almost cozy. The walls here were made of a softer material that glowed with warm golden light, and comfortable seating areas were arranged around what looked like a garden growing right out of the floor. Strange alien plants with luminescent flowers created a peaceful atmosphere that reminded Jiwoo of her grandmother's garden back on Earth. Queen Vexandra had changed too. Gone was the formal, commanding presence from the arena. Here she seemed more relaxed, her four arms moving in gentle, thoughtful gestures as she poured drinks from an elegant crystal pitcher. The liquid was a soft blue color that sparkled like it had stars floating in it. "Please sit," the queen said, gesturing to a chair that molded itself to fit Jiwoo's human proportions as soon as she settled into it. "I find I need to understand. What happened today?" Jiwoo accepted the cup the queen offered her, surprised when the first sip tasted exactly like the jasmine tea her mother used to make. Either this was an incredible coincidence, or the alien technology was somehow reading her memories and creating familiar flavors. "In 4,000 years of rule," Queen Vexandra began, settling into her own seat with fluid grace, "I have never witnessed such creativity." She paused, as if searching for the right words. "Your species approaches problems in ways that our greatest minds cannot predict." Jiwoo took another sip of the impossible tea, buying herself time to think. The queen seemed genuinely confused by what had happened in the arena, and Jiwoo was starting to suspect that maybe these trials weren't going the way they usually did. "That's because we're used to being outmatched," Jiwoo said finally. "Humans spend most of their time solving problems they shouldn't be able to solve. We're not the strongest species on our planet. We're not the fastest, and we're definitely not the most naturally equipped for survival. But we're stubborn, and we get creative when we have to." The queen's three eyes studied Jiwoo with intense curiosity. "Your planet has other species stronger than humans. Oh, definitely bears, tigers, sharks, elephants. Even our domestic animals are often stronger than we are. Humans survived and eventually dominated our world, not through physical strength, but by learning to think our way around problems." Jiwoo smiled, remembering her childhood fascination with nature documentaries. "We learned to work together, to use tools, to find solutions that other species never even considered." Queen Vexandra's bioluminescent markings, which had been a steady purple throughout their conversation, began shifting to different colors as she processed this information. "This explains much about your performance today. But there is something else that puzzles me." "What's that?" "You show no fear of me, despite my absolute power over your fate." The queen leaned forward slightly, her three eyes never leaving Jiwoo's face. "Every other tribute has either cowered in terror or raged with helpless anger. You do neither." Jiwoo considered this, swirling the tea in her cup and watching the star-like sparkles dance in the liquid. It was a fair question. She should be terrified. Here she was, light years from home, completely at the mercy of an alien ruler who apparently owned her according to some treaty she'd never heard of. Any rational person would be scared out of their mind. "Fear would cloud my judgment," she replied simply. "And besides, I don't think you're the type of ruler who wants a cowering slave." The queen's markings shifted again, this time to a warmer, more golden hue that reminded Jiwoo of sunset colors. "What makes you think you understand what type of ruler I am?" This was clearly an important moment. Jiwoo could feel it in the way the queen's posture changed, in the subtle shift in the room's lighting. Her answer here would matter more than anything she had said so far. "Because of how your people look at you," Jiwoo said, setting down her cup and meeting the queen's gaze directly. "In the arena today, I watched the crowd. They weren't watching you with fear or hatred. They were watching with respect, even affection. People don't look at tyrants that way." She paused, gathering her thoughts. "And because of this," she gestured around the comfortable chamber. "You could have kept me in a cell, you could have had me dragged here in chains. Instead, you're serving me tea that tastes like home and asking me questions like you actually care about the answers." Queen Vexandra was quiet for a long moment, her markings cycling through several different colors before settling on a deep, thoughtful blue. When she finally spoke, her voice was softer than Jiwoo had heard it before. "The tribute system has been in place for millennia," she said. "It was designed to bring the strongest, most capable individuals from across the galaxy to serve our empire. But in all that time, we have never found what we were truly looking for. What were you looking for? The Queen's three eyes seemed to focus on something far beyond the walls of her chamber. A partner, someone who could help us solve the problems that strength alone cannot overcome. Someone who could see solutions that we cannot. Jiwoo felt a chill run down her spine. And you think I might be that person? Today you did something that 47 worlds worth of champions could not do. You succeeded not through force or superior intellect, but through understanding, through seeing the trials differently than they were designed to be seen. The Queen looked back at Jiwoo. Tell me, what do you see when you look at our empire? Jiwoo jolted awake as a piercing alarm shattered the peaceful quiet of her chamber. The soft golden glow that had been so calming the night before was gone, replaced by harsh red emergency lighting that made everything look like it was painted in blood. The walls themselves seemed to be pulsing with urgency, and she could feel the ship vibrating around her in a way that made her stomach clench with worry. She rolled out of bed and grabbed the simple alien clothing that had been provided for her. As she dressed quickly, the ship shuddered violently, throwing her against the wall. Whatever was happening, it was serious. The corridor outside her chamber was chaos. Alien crew members rushed past her in every direction, their various forms of communication, creating a symphony of chirps, clicks, and sounds she couldn't identify. Some of them moved on legs like hers, others seemed to flow like liquid, and a few actually flew through the air using wings or some kind of natural levitation. Jiwoo followed the flow of traffic, reasoning that in any emergency, most people would be heading toward either the escape pods or the command center. Given that this was apparently a military vessel, she hoped it was the latter. The command center was a massive space filled with holographic displays that showed star charts, ship positions, and what looked like battle damage reports. Queen Vex Andra stood in the center of it all, her forearms moving with incredible speed across multiple control interfaces simultaneously. Her usual calm demeanor was gone, replaced by the focused intensity of a military commander in crisis. "We're under attack," she explained as Jiwoo approached, not even looking up from her controls. "The Void Seekers have found us again." Jiwoo moved to the massive viewport that dominated one wall of the command center and felt her blood turn to ice. The enemy ships were unlike anything she had ever seen or imagined. They didn't look like vessels so much as holes in space itself, dark tears in reality that seemed to absorb the light from nearby stars. Just looking at them made her eyes water, and her brain struggled to process what she was seeing. "What are they?" she asked, though part of her didn't want to know the answer. "An ancient enemy," Queen Vexandra replied, her voice tight with strain. "They've been hunting us for centuries, maybe longer. We don't even know where they come from or what they really want. All we know is that they consume everything in their path." One of the alien tactical officers, a being that looked like a cross between an octopus and a computer, spoke up in rapid clicks and whistles. Queen Vexandra's markings flashed to an angry orange color as she listened. "They're adapting to our defensive patterns faster than we can change them," she translated. For Jiwoo, every conventional strategy has failed. No matter what we try, they counter it within minutes. Jiwoo studied the battle displays, her military training automatically analyzing the tactical situation. The Stellar Dominion fleet was arranged in classic defensive formations, with their most powerful ships protecting smaller support vessels. It was textbook strategy, the kind of thing any military academy would teach. And that was exactly the problem. "Your fleet formations are too predictable," she said, pointing to the holographic display. "You're fighting like you're trying to minimize losses." Queen Vexandra's three eyes turned to her with a mixture of surprise and frustration. "Of course we are. Every ship lost weakens the Empire. Every crew member killed is a tragedy we can't afford." "But they're counting on that," Jiwoo realized, her mind racing as patterns became clear. "Look at how they're attacking. They're not trying to destroy your entire fleet. They're forcing you into defensive positions where you can't maneuver effectively." Wuxi moved closer to the display, her fingers tracing the movements of both fleets. "They know you'll sacrifice tactical advantage to protect your people, so they use that against you. Every time your commanders have to choose between winning and saving lives, they choose to save lives. The Void Seekers have learned to exploit that choice." The tactical officer made more clicking sounds. which Queen Vexandra translated with obvious reluctance. Commander Park asks what you would suggest instead. He points out that we cannot simply sacrifice our own people for tactical advantage. Jiwoo studied the display more carefully, noting the positioning of both fleets and the pattern of the enemy's attacks. An idea was forming in her mind, but it was risky. More than risky, it was the kind of plan that could backfire spectacularly if she was wrong about the enemy's psychology. "What if we stopped fighting defensively altogether?" she asked. "What if we made them think we were willing to sacrifice everything?" The command center fell silent, except for the continuing alarms and the hum of machinery. Every alien in the room was staring at her with expressions she couldn't read, but felt were probably some mixture of shock and horror. "I suggest we sacrifice our own forces?" Queen Vexandra asked, her voice carefully controlled. "No," Jiwoo said quickly. "I suggest we make them think we're willing to. There's a difference." She moved to the control interface, hoping the alien technology would respond to her touch the way it had during the trials. To her relief, the holographic displays shifted to show her the tactical options she was envisioning. "Human military doctrine teaches us that sometimes you have to risk everything to save everything," she explained. "But the key word is risk, not sacrifice. We make moves that look suicidal but actually aren't. We create chaos that seems random but follows a deeper pattern." Queen Vexandra's markings shifted through several colors rapidly as she processed this idea. "You want us to appear to lose control of our formations?" "Exactly. The Void Seekers have learned to predict your organized rational responses, but they won't know how to respond to organized chaos." The celebration in the command center had been brief but genuine. For the first time in centuries, the Stellar Dominion fleet had not just survived an encounter with the Void Seekers, they had actually driven them off. Alien crew members from dozens of different species had been congratulating each other in their various ways, creating a symphony of clicks, chirps, musical tones and sounds Jiwoo couldn't even begin to categorize. Queen Vexandra had been glowing, literally, her bioluminescent markings cycling through what Jiwoo was learning to recognize as colors of satisfaction and relief. The tactical displays showed the enemy fleet retreating into the dark spaces between stars, their reality-bending ships disappearing like nightmares fading at dawn. But the celebration died quickly when Commander Park Jin-soo entered the command. Center Jiwoo had noticed him before during the battle, a tall figure with scaled skin that shifted between green and bronze depending on the light. His species looked somewhat reptilian to human eyes, but his movements were fluid and graceful, and his large dark eyes held an intelligence that had impressed her during the fighting. He had been the one translating tactical information between the Queen and the various fleet commanders, handling multiple conversations simultaneously with the kind of calm efficiency that marked a true professional. Now, though, his scaled features were tight with concern, and the way he moved suggested he was carrying news that no one wanted to hear. "My Queen," he said, his voice carrying the subtle hiss that seemed natural to his species. "Our communications array detected something disturbing. During the battle, someone aboard this ship was feeding tactical information to the Void Seekers." The command center fell silent. The celebration died as if someone had thrown a switch, and Jiwoo could feel the mood in the room shift from relief to suspicion in an instant. She also became acutely aware that every alien in the room was now looking at her, as the newest addition to the Queen's inner circle and the only human aboard a ship full of beings who had never encountered her species before today. She was the obvious suspect. The logic was simple and brutal. A stranger appears, gains access to sensitive information, and suddenly the enemy seems to know their battle plans in real time. Commander Park continued his report, his dark eyes never leaving Jiwoo's face. "The transmissions were encrypted using methods we've never seen before. Our best communications specialists were able to break the code, but what they found was troubling." He activated a holographic display that showed streams of data, numbers and symbols flowing past too quickly for Jiwoo to follow. But she didn't need to understand the technical details to recognize the serious expressions on the faces around her. "The transmissions used human encryption," Park said, and Jiwoo felt her heart sink. Only someone with Earth military knowledge could have created them. The mathematical principles involved are unique to your species' approach to secure communications. The silence in the command center was deafening. Jiwoo could feel the weight of dozens of alien gazes, and she knew that her next words would determine whether she lived to see another day. "That's convenient," she said calmly, proud that her voice remained steady despite the racing of her heart. Almost too convenient. Queen Vexandra's markings shifted to colors that Jiwoo had learned indicated deep thought and uncertainty. "What do you mean?" Jiwoo took a deep breath, her military training kicking in. She had been in difficult situations before, though never quite like this one. The key was to stay calm, think logically, and look for the patterns that others might miss. "I mean that if I were really a spy for the Void Seekers, would I use encryption that could be traced directly back to my home planet?" she asked. "That would be like leaving a signed confession at the scene of a crime." Commander Park's scaled. Features shifted into what might have been a frown. "Perhaps you underestimated our ability to break your codes. Or perhaps someone wanted you to think a human was responsible," Jiwoo replied. "Think about it logically. I've been on this ship for less than a week. How could I have established communication with the Void Seekers? How would I even know how to contact them?" She gestured to the tactical displays still showing the aftermath of the battle. "And more importantly, why would I help you win the fight if I was working for the other side? The strategy that drove them off came from me. If I were a spy, wouldn't I want you to lose?" The command center buzzed with quiet conversations as the various alien officers discussed this among themselves. Jiwoo caught fragments of different languages, but the tone was clear enough. They were debating whether her logic made sense or whether it was just clever misdirection. Queen Vexandra raised one of her forearms, and the room fell silent again. "These are valid points," she said carefully, "but the evidence is clear. Human encryption was used to communicate with our enemies." "Then someone else knows human encryption methods," Jiwoo said firmly. "Someone who has access to Earth technology and knowledge, but who isn't actually from Earth." She looked around the room, studying the faces of the assembled aliens. Most of them looked confused or suspicious, but a few seemed to be considering her words seriously. "The real question isn't whether I'm guilty," she continued. "The real question is, who would benefit from making you think I am? Who gains if you lose trust in humans? Who profits if this alliance fails before it really begins?" Commander Park's eyes narrowed. "You suggest there is a conspiracy against you specifically?" "I suggest there's a conspiracy against the idea of humans being useful allies," Jiwoo replied. "Someone doesn't want this partnership to work, and framing me for treason would be an excellent way to end it." Queen Vexandra had given Jiwoo and Commander Park access to the ship's complete data archives, though Jiwoo suspected this was as much a test as it was an investigation. If she really was a spy, giving her access to sensitive information would be incredibly foolish. If she was innocent, then maybe she could help uncover the real traitor. The archive chamber was even more impressive than the one where Jiwoo had first seen the treaty. This space contained not just legal documents, but the complete historical records of the Stellar Dominion. Millions of glowing data crystals floated in organized patterns, each one containing years or even decades of information about different aspects of the Empire. Commander Park moved through the archives with practiced ease, his scaled hands dancing over control surfaces that responded to his touch by calling up specific records. Despite the tension between them, Jiwoo found herself impressed by his efficiency and thoroughness. "Here," he said, gesturing to a cluster of data crystals that had gathered around them like curious fireflies. "These contain all the records related to the tribute system over the past 3 centuries. As Jiwoo watched, the crystals projected their contents into the air around them, creating a 3-dimensional timeline of every champion who had been brought to serve the Stellar Dominion. There were dozens of them, beings from worlds she had never heard of, each one supposedly the finest warrior or greatest mind their species had to offer. What struck her immediately was how similar all their stories were. They all start the same way, she observed, studying the floating records. "Initial promise, impressive performance in early tests, signs of great potential." Park nodded grimly. "And they all end the same way as well. failure, breakdown, or death within a standard year of arrival. Jiwoo moved closer to examine the medical records, her military training in field medicine, helping her understand the basic biological data, even though these were alien physiology reports. What she saw there made her blood run cold. "Look at this," she said, pointing to a series of biological scans from different species. Each tribute showed signs of neural degradation just before their failures, brain tissue breaking down, nerve connections severing, cognitive abilities declining rapidly. Park's reptilian features grew darker as he studied the same data. But look at what the medical reports concluded. They attributed it to stress, to difficulty adapting to alien environments, to diseases that affected interspecies biology. Except the symptoms are too consistent, Jiwoo realized. Different species, different biologies, different environmental needs, but the neural degradation follows almost identical patterns. That's not natural. That's artificial. She pulled up more records, cross-referencing the medical data with the timeline of each tribute's decline. The pattern became even clearer when viewed this way. Every single champion, regardless of their species or capabilities, had suffered the same type of brain damage at roughly the same point in their service. Someone was deliberately sabotaging them, she whispered. Commander Park's dark eyes widened as the implications hit him. "I supervised many of these examinations personally," he said slowly, "but I'm certain the symptoms never appeared this consistent in the original data. The medical readings I remember were much more varied, much more random, which means someone with access to the medical databases altered the records afterward," Jiwoo concluded. "They made the sabotage look like natural failures, then covered their tracks by changing the historical data." She was about to suggest they examine the access logs for the medical databases when a voice spoke from behind them. "Very clever, human. Much more clever than I had hoped." They spun around to find court historian Kim Yuna standing in the entrance to the archive chamber. Jiwoo had met her briefly during her first day on the ship, a quiet woman who seemed to spend most of her time managing the vast collection of historical records. She had seemed harmless, even friendly. Now, flanked by a squad of armed guards whose weapons were pointed directly at Jiwoo and Park, she looked anything but harmless. "Historian Yuna," Park said, his voice carefully controlled, despite the obvious shock. "What is the meaning of this?" "The meaning, dear Commander, is that your human friend has discovered something she was never supposed to find." Yuna stepped closer, and as she did, something strange began happening to her appearance. Her human-like features were shifting, becoming less defined, as if she were wearing a disguise that was starting to slip. "You altered the medical records," Jiwoo said, pieces of the puzzle clicking into place in her mind. "You've been sabotaging the tributes for centuries, making sure none of them could succeed." Yuna smiled, and her teeth were too sharp, too numerous for a human mouth. "I have been protecting this empire from a terrible mistake. The tribute system was always doomed to fail because it was based on a fundamental misunderstanding of what strength really means." "You're not human at all, are you?" Jiwoo asked, though she was already certain of the answer. "I am something much older and much wiser than your primitive species," Yuna replied. Her form continued to shift, revealing features that seemed to absorb light rather than reflect it. "I have watched civilizations rise and fall across this galaxy for millennia. I know what happens when species try to combine their strengths instead of acknowledging their limitations." Commander Park reached slowly for his weapon, but the guards immediately raised their own arms in response. "You work for the Void Seekers," he accused. "I work for the natural order of the universe," Yuna corrected. "Some species are meant to rule and others are meant to serve or disappear. The Stellar Dominion's attempt to create alliances and partnerships threatens that order." Jiwoo felt a chill of understanding. "You've been feeding information to the Void Seekers all along, not just today but for centuries. You've been weakening the Empire from within while they attack from without." "And it would have worked perfectly," Yuna said, her voice taking on harmonics that hurt to listen to, "if you hadn't been so inconveniently successful at those trials." The throne room had been transformed into something resembling a courtroom, with Queen Vexandra presiding from her elevated seat while nobles and advisors from across the stellar dominion filled the vast space. Jiwoo had never seen so many different alien species gathered in one place, and under other circumstances, she might have been fascinated by the diversity. Now, though, she was focused on the hostile energy radiating from many of the assembled beings. Yuna stood in the center of the room, still in restraints but no longer bothering to maintain her human disguise. Her true form was unsettling to look at directly, seeming to shift and change whenever Jiwoo wasn't focusing on her completely. She looked like a shadow that had learned to stand upright and speak. "The evidence is clear," Queen Vexandra announced to the assembled court. Court historian Kim Yuna has confessed to centuries of sabotage against the tribute system. She has admitted to altering medical records, poisoning champions from dozens of worlds, and feeding strategic information to our enemies. A murmur ran through the crowd, but Jiwoo noticed it wasn't the sound of unified outrage she had expected. Instead, the various aliens seemed to be debating among themselves, their voices creating a complex symphony of different languages and communication methods. Lord Councillor Han Seokjin stepped forward from the crowd. He was an impressive figure, tall and broad, with skin that looked like polished stone and eyes that glowed with their own internal light. When he spoke, his voice carried the authority of someone used to being listened to. "Even if the human speaks truth about this deception," he said, his words echoing through the chamber, "we cannot ignore the larger problem. The tribute system has failed us for centuries. No world has provided a worthy champion capable of solving our real challenges." Jiwoo felt her heart sink as she heard murmurs of agreement from parts of the crowd. Even with Yuna's sabotage exposed, there were those who saw her success as an anomaly rather than proof that the system could work. Queen Vexandra's markings shifted to colors that Jiwoo was learning, indicated frustration and concern. "What alternative do you propose, Counselor? Surrender to the Void Seekers? Watch our civilization crumble while we abandon the principles that built this empire?" Seokjin's glowing eyes swept across the assembled court before settling on the Queen. "Alliance, through strength, Your Majesty. We have the most powerful fleet in the galaxy. Instead of waiting for gifts that never come, perhaps it is time to take what we need." The word sent a chill through Jiwoo as she realized what he was really suggesting. This wasn't just about her or even the tribute system anymore. This was about the fundamental nature of what the Stellar Dominion would become. "You're talking about conquest," she said, her voice carrying clearly through the vast chamber. "You want to turn this empire into something it was never meant to be." Seokjin turned his burning gaze on her, and she could feel the weight of his disapproval like a physical force. And what would a primitive human know about what this empire was meant to be? Your species has existed for mere moments compared to our history. "I know that conquest and alliance are opposites," Jiwoo replied, standing straighter despite feeling incredibly small in the vast room full of beings who could probably crush her without effort. "I know that the moment you start taking what you want by force, you stop being the kind of civilization that others want to join willingly." More murmurs ran through the crowd, but now they seemed more divided. Some voices carried tones of agreement, while others sounded angry or dismissive. Commander Park stepped forward to stand beside Jiwoo, his scaled features set in determined lines. "The human raises an important point. If we abandon the principles of cooperation and mutual benefit, what separates us from the Void Seekers themselves?" "Survival separates us," Seokjin shot back. "The Void Seekers grow stronger while we grow weaker. How many more worlds will fall while we wait for the perfect alliance that may never come?" Queen Vexandra raised one of her four arms, and the room gradually fell silent. When she spoke, her voice carried the weight of 4,000 years of rule. "The choice before us is not just about military strategy," she said slowly. "It is about who we choose to be as a civilization. Do we remain true to the ideals that our ancestors built this empire upon, or do we abandon them in the name of expedience?" Jiwoo could see the internal struggle playing out in the Queen's bioluminescent markings, colors shifting rapidly as she weighed impossible choices. The room waited in tense silence for her decision. "There is a third option," Jiwoo said quietly, but her words somehow carried through the vast space. "Something that neither the tribute system nor conquest can achieve. Every eye in the room turned to her, and she felt the weight of their attention like gravity from a dozen different worlds. Partnership, she continued. Real partnership between equals, not tributes taken by force or alliance through conquest, but cooperation freely given because all parties benefit. Seokjin's laugh was like grinding stone. Pretty words from someone whose planet signed away their freedom in desperation. What makes you think other worlds would choose differently? Because, Jiwoo said, meeting his burning gaze directly, you've never actually asked them to choose. You've only offered them the options of submission or destruction. What if there was a third way? The throne room erupted in debate as nobles and advisors argued among themselves in dozens of different languages. But through it all, Queen Vexandra's three eyes never left Jiwoo's face, and her markings had shifted to colors that suggested deep, careful thought. The future of the stellar dominion, and possibly the entire galaxy, hung in the balance of whatever decision would be made in this room. 3 months had passed since that dramatic confrontation in the throne room, and Jiwoo could hardly believe how much had changed. She stood in the same crystalline chamber where she had first awakened on this ship, but it looked completely different now. The space had been transformed into a conference room, with a massive circular table that seemed to shift and adapt its surface to accommodate the wildly different physiologies of the beings gathered around it. Representatives from dozens of worlds filled the chamber, creating a spectacular display of galactic diversity. There were the tree-like beings from Sylvana Prime, whose bark-covered skin rustled softly when they moved. The crystalline entities from the resonance worlds communicated through musical tones that made the air itself seem to sing. Aquatic delegates from the ocean worlds floated in specialized environment suits filled with their native waters, while the energy-based life forms from the stellar nurseries existed as contained balls of living light. And there, sitting across from Jiwoo at the curved table, was Ambassador Song Miran from Earth. Seeing another human after months surrounded by aliens felt surreal, like waking up from a dream to find that the dream had somehow become reality. Queen Vexandra stood at the head of the table, her 4 arms gesturing gracefully as she addressed the assembled delegates. Her bioluminescent markings were cycling through colors that Jiwoo had learned indicated satisfaction and hope, a stark contrast to the worried patterns she had displayed during those first difficult weeks of negotiation. "The Mutual Defense Compact," the Queen announced, her voice carrying clearly through the chamber's advanced acoustic systems that translated her words into dozens of different languages simultaneously, "officially replaces all previous tribute agreements. Each world contributes according to their abilities and receives protection according to their needs." The document that materialized in the center of the table was nothing like the ancient treaty that had brought Jiwoo here. Instead of the one-sided terms that had bound worlds to provide tributes, this new agreement was built on principles of mutual respect and shared benefit. Ambassador Song Miran leaned forward, her professional diplomatic training evident in her composed demeanor, despite the incredible circumstances. Humanity is prepared to share our tactical innovations and adaptive strategies in exchange for advanced technology and scientific knowledge. We believe that our species' talent for creative problem-solving can benefit the entire alliance. A chorus of agreement rose from around the table, though it sounded like nothing that had ever been heard on Earth. The tree beings rustled their approval, the crystalline entities chimed in harmonious tones, and the aquatic delegates created complex bubble patterns that somehow conveyed enthusiastic consent. Jiwoo smiled as she watched the proceedings. The transformation hadn't been easy. Conservative factions within the Stellar Dominion had fought the changes every step of the way, some of them violently. Lord Councillor Seokjin and his supporters had attempted what amounted to a coup, trying to seize control of the empire and implement their conquest-based philosophy. But they had failed, partly because of the loyalty Queen Vexandra commanded among her people, and partly because of what had happened during the Void Seekers' latest attack. That battle had been the real test of the new alliance system. Instead of relying on a single champion or the Stellar Dominion's military might alone, the defense had been coordinated across multiple species and worlds. Human tactical flexibility had been combined with Sylvanan biological engineering, crystalline, computational power, and aquatic stealth technology. The result had been a victory more complete than any the Empire had achieved in centuries. The Void Seekers hadn't just been driven off this time. They had been decisively defeated, their reality-bending ships destroyed or scattered across the galaxy. It was the kind of victory that changed everything, proving that cooperation could achieve what domination never could. The trade agreements are already showing remarkable results, reported Delegate Pak Jamin from the Economic Council, his tentacled form shifting colors as he spoke. Earth's agricultural techniques have increased food production on 7 worlds, while alien medical technology has virtually eliminated several human diseases. Ambassador Song Myran nodded, consulting notes on a device that looked like it belonged in a science fiction movie. Our scientists are particularly excited about the energy research being shared by the stellar entities. The potential applications for clean power generation are revolutionary. Jiwoo felt a warm glow of pride as she listened to the reports. It was working. The alliance was actually working. Worlds that had never trusted each other were sharing their most precious resources and knowledge. Species that had been enemies for millennia were finding common ground in their desire to build something better than what had come before. Queen Vex Andra's attention turned to her, and Jiwoo felt that familiar mix of respect and affection that had grown between them over the months. Commander Lee Jiwoo, the Queen said formally, as the architect of this new alliance and Earth's first ambassador to the Stellar Dominion, do you have any final words for the assembled delegates? Jiwoo stood, looking around the table at beings she had come to consider friends despite their vast differences. 3 months ago, I woke up in this room as a prisoner, bound by a treaty I had never signed to serve an empire I didn't understand. Today I stand here as a free citizen of a galaxy where cooperation has replaced conquest, where diversity is celebrated instead of feared. She paused, thinking about how far they had all come. The tribute system was built on the idea that strength comes from taking the best from others, but we've learned that real strength comes from giving the best of ourselves freely and receiving the gifts that others choose to share. The chamber erupted in the various forms of applause and approval from dozens of different species. As the celebration continued around her, Jiwoo looked out through the transparent walls at the stars beyond, where ships from 100 worlds patrolled together in formations that would have been impossible just months before. She was exactly where she belonged.